Okay. All right, so we are now recording. Well, welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Grace, and I'm from the GIN. I am joined by two of my colleagues from the GIN, Zarmeen Pavri, which I apologize, your name is not on the slide, who is our senior advisor in Australia, and Maud Savary Mornay, who is our senior advisor in Southeast Asia. And I am also very, very excited to be joined by two others on the line. First, Purdy Bowden, who is the Assistant Director at DFAT, the Australian Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade, and Jennifer Buckley, who is a Senior Managing Director at the SWIFT Fund. And Purdy and Jennifer have very graciously offered their time to be here today to talk to us all about their gender lens investing approach and strategy. So we're excited to talk to them today. And all of us on the line are very excited to talk to you about gender lens investing in the Southeast Asia region. And before we start, I'll do just a few quick housekeeping notes. I did mention that we are recording, just for future reference. And additionally, everyone, if you don't mind muting yourself, I think you're muted upon entry, just to preserve the audio quality. But if you do have any questions as we go along, please don't hesitate to use the chat box. We will get into a lot of great stuff tonight, today for most of you, tonight for me. And we want to make sure that you have the opportunity to ask questions. So please don't be shy about putting those into the chat box. We will have time for Q&A at the end. Okay. So to kick it off, I will go through the agenda for today. First, we'll do some welcome and introductions of GIN. Next, we'll go over the state of impact investing, the market, and gender lens investing in Southeast Asia. We will also quickly review the state of IMM, and then how IRIS Plus can be used for gender lens investing. And then we will chat with Purdy and Jennifer about their approaches to gender lens investing within their organizations. Okay, so a quick introduction of the GIN. I know maybe folks on the line are familiar, but just to get us all on the same page and quickly introduce us. So the GIN is the global champion of impact investing, and we're dedicated to increasing the scale and effectiveness of impact investing around the world. And we do that in a few different ways, including building a community of practice, providing tools, guidance, and resources to help investors identify metrics and integrate impact considerations into investment management, which is what we'll largely focus on today. We also publish actionable data, evidence, and insights about impact investing, and have a broad network of over 30,000 individuals across the world that participate in our activities. And really our vision is to create a world in which all investments consider social and environmental impact alongside risk and return. So in this future that we envision, investors integrate impact considerations into all decisions to build strong communities, a healthy environment, and a sustainable future for all. And with that quick introduction of the GIN, I'm going to pass it off to my colleague Maud, who will start with the state of impact investing.
Thank you, Grace. Just want to give you a couple of data on the size of the market. You may know that the GIN has actually developed a methodology to estimate the impact investing market size. And based on our analysis, we believe that the asset under management today is 715 billion. So that's the size of the market year-end 2019, which means today in 2021, it's certainly larger. And this is very encouraging. It's a significant supply of capital. It does have the capacity to address some of the world's most pressing problems. And we can see, next slide, that impact investing is happening actually everywhere, all regions in the world. And in Asia, it's roughly 19% of in terms of market size. If you take Asia Pacific as a whole, including South Asia, East Asia, Southeast Asia, and Oceania. So the region is poised for growth, and we have all the conditions together to grow the market. Next, please. So if I compare, I joined this space 12 years ago, right? And probably the range of choice was very different. It was mostly private debt. Today, as investors and as investees, you have a lot of choices in private debt and private equity. It covers actually all asset classes. Next, please. Very, very important reminder. Most of the investors are looking actually for risk-adjusted market rate return, actually 7 out of 10. And that's something very important, right? Given and particularly in Asia, that so sometimes people believe it's actually an activity which is close to philanthropy. Actually, it's wrong. It's a market. Investors are looking for market rate returns. And that's a very important message. Next. So last but not least, Southeast Asia, it's a small but growing fast region, as we can see. It's actually one of the fastest growing regions. And altogether, we are hoping to grow it faster and allocate more capital to impact investment. Next. So now I will hand over to Grace, but before I do that, I'd like to give my personal note on gender lens investing. Given that I have 12 years of experience in this space, mostly in private debt, climate finance and financial inclusion, and I have done a lot of due diligence on the field. I've met with many deprived communities and many women in particular. And GLI for me resonates as if you are a woman in emerging countries and belonging to these poor communities, it means you have less access to financial inclusion, less access to bank account, less access to education, less access to healthcare, etc., etc. And all that is true particularly today in terms of COVID. And actually gender lens investing, it's actually a way to provide, it's an investment opportunity for investors, but it's also a way to provide access for these women to basic products and services and to the low-income population, and particularly in financial inclusion, in climate finance, in health and education. On this note, hand over to Grace. Grace, it's yours.
Sorry, finding the unmute should come much more easily than that. Okay, so yes, thank you, Maud, and we'll quickly go over the state of gender lens investing in Southeast Asia. So just a few stats here, just around the reach of, or we'll go back to what is gender lens investing, and I'm sure folks on the line are very familiar, at least would like to learn more. But it's investing with the intent to address gender issues or promote gender equity, and or informing investment decisions through processes or strategies focused on gender. So it may happen at the investee level, as well as those strategies and processes focused on gender. And we also will just give a few stats really here to show the prevalence of the growth of gender lens investing in East and Southeast Asia. So this is from a gender lens investing landscape report, where here you can see that there's lots of gender lens investing movement in private and public markets across East and Southeast Asia. You can see the 77% increase from 13 investment vehicles in 2018 in the private markets. And then on the public market side, up to 478 million AUM there for gender lens investing. So growing. And the next slide shows that even more, that the investments in Southeast Asia, the number of deals are growing along with the capital deployed. So this, you can see the first stat here, the first bar is about 10 years worth of capital deployed, and the next three are just representing 1 year. So you can see quite a big increase in capital deployed and number of deals across gender lens investing for Southeast Asia, and how quickly it has grown over the last few years. Additionally, GLI investments by country in Southeast Asia. You can see the spread across Southeast Asian countries between 2017 and 2019. And this is from a report, The Advance of Impact Investing in Southeast Asia, put forward by Australian Aid Investing Women and IntelliCap in 2020. And lastly, just as an introduction to gender lens investing in Southeast Asia, in the same report, many factors were cited as driving the growth of gender lens investing in Southeast Asia, including gender-focused programs acting as catalysts for GLI, ecosystem efforts. I'm sure most on the line are familiar with AVPN and Senkelp. Research, growth in women entrepreneurship in the region, Maud was alluding to that a bit earlier, and market builders and experts promoting women empowerment. So that is a bit about the growth of GLI, or gender lens investing in Southeast Asia. And I'm going to give a quick introduction on the state of impact measurement and management, and where IRIS Plus fits into all of this, and how IRIS Plus can help with your impact measurement and management practice. Okay, so impact measurement and management, and again, I know we're going through a lot of information, lots of different topics, but really trying to get to the investors themselves to talk about their GLI strategies. So we'll do a very brief overview of impact measurement and management and how IRIS Plus comes into play, especially as it relates to gender lens investing. So first, what is impact measurement and management? So this is the process by which impact investors can understand the effects of their investments. And really this means figuring out the ways to increase the positive impacts and mitigate the negative impacts. And this is always in alignment with one's goal and is one's goals, and is very iterative by nature. And according to our second edition of the State of Impact Measurement and Management Practice report, so a report put out by the GIN, you'll see data from that report in the next few slides. So investors are showing commitment to various types of impact through their impact category targets. And there's a small highlight here around diversity and inclusion, including gender. So showing that we see folks are increasingly looking to invest with a gender lens. You can see some other target categories like employment, agriculture, and financial services. Additionally, most investors set impact targets. So they may be qualitative or quantitative. Quite a few there set both quantitative and qualitative targets. And this is exactly why we're here, to talk about setting those targets and figuring out how to measure if you're tracking to reach those targets. Next, investors cited multiple ideas and behaviors needed to advance IMM practice. And most commonly, investors consider transparency and impact data very important. So you can see that 78% there. And a close second is integration of impact data into decision making. So again, this is exactly why we're here today, to show how IRIS Plus can be used to help with that transparency and help with that impact data. And lastly, before we do a very quick dive into IRIS Plus, investors also cited needing impact benchmarks and tools to strengthen impact screening. And here, excuse me, we will definitely dive into how IRIS Plus can help pave the way for impact benchmarks, and how IRIS Plus can be used today to strengthen that impact screening of your investments. So a quick introduction to IRIS Plus. IRIS Plus is the generally accepted system to measure, manage, and optimize impact, helps investors translate impact goals into real results. And IRIS Plus now launched in May of 2019 and builds on about a decade's worth of work of the IRIS catalog of metrics. And IRIS Plus is a system that helps investors translate those impact goals into real results. And what you're seeing on the screen here are some of the key features of this system. So one of the key features is core metric sets. So these are short lists of key indicators that help you measure progress towards one's goals. There is the catalog of metrics I mentioned, an evidence base that helps tie those metrics and those outputs to the intended long-term impact. There is practical guidance that exists in IRIS Plus that help you improve your IMM practice and impact outcomes. And it's also important to note that IRIS Plus is aligned with over 50 industry frameworks and standards. So this means that we are not trying to recreate the wheel in terms of what is out there in the market for to use in terms of frameworks and standards for IMM, but rather we're bringing it all in one place, such that when you use IRIS Plus, you are aligned to other standards and frameworks, and the opposite, it's framework agnostic, and if you are using other standards, IRIS Plus can be integrated as well in those. And IRIS Plus was created in consultation with over 1,600 stakeholders at this point. So there's a sample here that you can see, but this is the important note here is that this system, the IRIS Plus system, represents industry best practices. So it is not the GIN saying these are the best things to do in terms of IMM. It's really an industry-wide collaboration in developing IRIS Plus and the resources that exist. And IRIS Plus was really designed to solve three key needs in IMM.
I'll be done at 6.
Oh.
Is the question of this, and that's going to be too late to pick up the card today.
We don't mind.
Could you mute yourself, please?
Oh, there we go. I think, okay. I think I was able to mute you. Thank you. So IRIS Plus was designed to solve a few key needs as expressed by investors. The first one was this need to have consistent implementation of norms and principles. And I mentioned those core metric sets, and that's exactly what they help to achieve. Similarly, those core metrics for clear and comparable data. And this really paves the way for benchmarking data. So benchmarking was one of the items cited by investors in terms of what was needed to push the market forward. And those core metric sets really start to drive towards that benchmarking capability. And lastly, investors cited a need for streamlined best-in-class resources. And again, IRIS Plus brings all the tools together you need to track your impact, measure, manage, and optimize your impact all in one place. And IRIS Plus now, since launch of May in 2019, there has been quite an uptick in use. So you can see the users span the globe and span many types of organizations and types of stakeholders. So over 16,000 unique users at this point have used IRIS Plus, over 10,000 firms and organizations. And this is all to say IRIS Plus can be used by stakeholders across the impact investing landscape. So no matter where you are in your IMM journey or what type of stakeholder you are in the impact investing landscape, IRIS Plus can likely help you with your impact measurement and management journey and practice. And excuse me, we will get into how IRIS Plus can be used for gender lens investing specifically. So I mentioned core metric sets and other key features of IRIS Plus, and all of these key features exist under themes. So IRIS Plus is organized thematically, and investors are able to go into the system, choose a theme and a strategy, and find information related to that theme and strategy. So I'm actually just going to push through the animation here and show you that under Gender Lens and IRIS Plus, there are several strategic goals that you can choose and get more information on this strategic goal. And IRIS Plus can help you measure and manage your impact related to these commonly cited goals from investors under the Gender Lens theme. So again, IRIS Plus is helping to select those metrics, helps you measure the results, and helps you learn, improve, adjust, and communicate those results as well. Now, under each strategy that was mentioned in the previous slide, in Iris Plus, you will first see an overview tab that provides research, stats, and answers to key questions about your chosen strategic goal. So this helps, we've heard from investors that this helps in terms of perhaps investing in new themes that you may not have before. If you're new to gender lens investing, you will see the overview here in terms of what the problem is, who's most impacted, etc. All arranged, the information is all organized by the 5 dimensions of impact. And here again, it's just answers to key questions around this strategic goal. And the next tab is that evidence base that I mentioned. And here you're able to select relevant outcomes related to that chosen strategic goal. And you will see a list of evidence here organized by study rigor, by the NESTA standards for study, for study, and for evidence, excuse me. And this can help you easily find impact evidence, again, tying those long-term outcomes and impacts to the core metric sets that Iris Plus will suggest you track for this specific goal. So this comes in really handy for a couple of reasons we've heard from investors. One, in creating that theory of change. So often this is referenced to ensure that what investments are being made, again, really tie to that long-term impact you are hoping to have. Additionally, this cuts down on time spent of finding that evidence, which can be quite tough sometimes. I'm sure a lot of folks on the line can relate to and are aware, but this evidence base really helps to cut down on that time spent finding the related evidence to those long-term outcomes. And quickly, I will review the core metric set. So I mentioned that these are key, short lists of key indicators related to the strategic goal that's chosen. And this is so you don't have to go through that whole catalog of metrics to find the most relevant key indicators for the strategic goal that you've chosen. And this is another way also to really standardize what is being tracked under this strategy of yours, and compare those results. So you're able to compare against your own portfolio, other investments made under a gender lens or another theme, and you're able to use these core metric sets to track your impact and optimize. And these are a starting point for what you can measure. You can also measure other metrics that are relevant to your specific context and goals, but the core metric sets will at least give you that starter kit of metrics related to the chosen strategic goal. And lastly, before I hand it over to our guests to talk a bit more about their strategies and approaches, the other tab I'll point out here is the resources tab. So here you will see third-party recommended resources from across the industry that have been vetted and are related to, again, this theme and your chosen strategic goal. So you have recommended resources in addition to the core metric sets, evidence, and overview that you're able to use for this strategy. And that was a very quick and dirty overview of Iris Plus and what exists in the system to help you measure, manage, and optimize your impact, especially when it comes to gender lens investing. And Maud, I will hand it back to you.
Thank you, Grace. So thank you for your great presentation. And as a reminder, Iris Plus is a public good, so you are free to open an account and test by yourself the system if needed. Now I would like to introduce our 2 wonderful speakers for today, Purdy and Jennifer. Purdy is Assistant Director at the Australian Department and Foreign Affairs and Trade, and DFAT is a very strong promoter of gender lens investing through several initiatives. So Purdy, why don't you start, maybe, the floor is yours, explaining what DFAT is doing in the space of GLI, and also how you would use Iris Plus, and maybe what are the challenges and you face, and what are the next steps as well in the development of your approach. Birdie?
Great, thank you. And hi, everybody. Thank you, Maud and Grace, and thanks to the GIN for putting on this event. It's always exciting to have the opportunity to talk about gender lens investing. And as Maud has mentioned, the Australian government has a really strong commitment to gender equality and women's economic empowerment through our aid program. GLI is a big part of that increasingly, and we think it's not just a social and ethical imperative, but it also makes good business sense. We know that women are overlooked by traditional banks and investors, and we think this is a missed opportunity, and one that, as the Australian government, we want to help to correct. We do have a range of programs that seek to do this. I have 5 minutes to talk about this, so I will focus only on our Emerging Markets Impact Investment Fund, which was launched in July last year. We call it the EMIF. So for those who may not have heard of the fund, it's a $40 million fund of funds, which will provide equity and debt to SME funds in the Indo-Pacific. So when we talk about the Indo-Pacific, it's the South and Southeast Asia, as well as the Pacific Islands. The fund is sector agnostic, but it will target funds that provide capital to SMEs that otherwise struggle to receive conventional finance. So this is hitting the so-called missing middle, which is a big issue in the region. It has, as a wholly government-owned fund, it has development impact as its primary objective. So EMIF can do concessional lending and take subordinate positions to crowd in additional investors. It also has a technical assistance facility to help SME funds improve their development impact, including their gender lens investment strategies. And we anticipate that EMIF will make its first investment in the coming months. So it's getting to a really exciting stage for us. That's EMIF in a nutshell. Absolutely, more information for those that are interested is on our website, emif.fund. So now I want to turn to the question of how does EMIF approach gender? And the answer is complex because there is no one way that EMIF approaches gender. Rather, gender considerations were built into the EMIF design at really every level of our operations. We seek to demonstrate best practice in impact and gender lens investment and to help shift the market towards adopting best practice as well in really a sort of collaborative way as well as through modeling. So in the few minutes I have available today, I want to outline, just to give you a kind of concrete illustration of what we do as a fund, the 3 tiers that gender considerations are kind of a core part of EMIF's mandate and operations. So the first tier is at the kind of fund level. So we seek to model best practice at the fund level. So our investment manager consortium led by Serona Asset Management is majority female, including our director of investments. And our investment committee, 2 out of 5 members are women. And this includes our very own Maud, who is co-hosting this webinar. As part of modeling best practice and achieving the best outcomes, we also embed gender into every stage of the investment process. So for example, our initial investment screen identifies whether candidate funds have an existing gender lens investment approach or a willingness to develop one. Funds that don't meet that criteria will generally not be considered further. But this is an important point, and I'll come back to it. We don't expect a fully developed gender strategy. So I'll come back to that in a moment because it's a key point. We use in our screening our gender assessment tools to rate each of our investment opportunities. And this lets us compare across investments, but it also forms a baseline so that we can track progress over time. So that's an important sort of benchmark baseline setting that we then track through our M&E approach. And from that point, we measure and track a range of gender indicators across the investment life cycle to track progress and to generate evidence that will help us achieve EMIF's goal of growing the impact and gender lens investment market in the region. And I'll come back to the specific indicators in a moment. So by embedding impact and gender into our processes, that's how we do things, we expect to achieve better financial impact and gender outcomes and to influence others in the industry to adopt this approach. So that's the first tier. That's what we do as a fund. in our own processes and in our own workings. So the second tier is that we actively and collaboratively help our investee funds to improve their gender lens investment processes and the way they approach gender within their own business. So the SME funds that IMF invests in are eligible for technical assistance, and the TA is really targeted at helping our investee funds improve their impact and their gender lens investment processes. So this is bespoke assistance. It's developed after a gap analysis that we do and that we collaborate with the funds to do during the due diligence phase. As I mentioned, we don't expect all our investees to have fully developed gender strategies. So what we want to see is that gender is part of their strategy and that there's a willingness to improve. So we meet the fund manager where they are and we work with them to move along the spectrum of GLI sophistication and capability. And we expect that within our portfolio, there'll be a range of kind of levels of sophistication. And at each point, we will hopefully shift the needle to improve that. And we found from our experiences in other programs, including investing in women, that really there's, once you kind of introduce this as a concept, there's a lot of appetite and willingness to embrace gender lens. And people see that it's not just the right thing to do, it also makes business sense. So things that we consider at that kind of, at this stage as sort of of when we're screening for funds is what systems does the fund have in place to measure GLI and social impact? What is the female-male composition of the management team and the investment committee? What is the average salary of women compared to men? And are there initiatives in place in the fund to specifically advance women in the workplace? So that's the second tier. And finally, the third tier, IMF aims to encourage investment in SMEs that support women. So this is a rather expansive definition. We don't just look at investment in women-led or women-owned SMEs. For us, SMEs that support women include businesses that supply products or services that benefit women, or that adopt gender equality practices in their workplace policies, or that sort of all throughout their supply chains. So it's a broader definition than we've seen others in the market take. Just conscious of time, so I won't spend too much more time explaining that. But just to note, we do have, as part of the technical assistance facility of IMF, funding available to support the underlying SMEs to get the knowledge, skills and tools that they need to grow their business and impact through gender mainstreaming. So the technical assistance works both at the SME funder level and also at the underlying SMEs. I focused on our gender approach as a whole and less on the particular indicators. So I'll talk just briefly to finish up about the indicators and happy to field questions on anything both during the session, or if anyone's interested to follow up with us directly or via the gym, then you're more than welcome. So to help us track and measure our gender outcomes, we have a range of indicators, and these were based on kind of an alignment with our baseline and investment process. So as I've said, most of them are assessed at the due diligence stage and then again after close, and then regularly through time. So this really helps with that integration of gender from the very start all the way through. So it's not just something we consider after the fact. Some indicators have been selected to give us a sense of an investment's ability to deliver what we can determine to be exceptional impact. So, for example, we will monitor the SME fund's adoption of GLI across phases of their investment process. And as this occurs or doesn't occur, we're interested to understand through our evaluations why and how this adoption occurs, so that we can work out where we are getting the most bang for buck in terms of encouraging gender approaches. And the bulk of indicators we monitor are aligned with industry standards, and IRIS Plus indicators have been a key resource in putting together our M&E framework. And this is important because it facilitates data comparison across DFAT's investments and across the Australian government's investments. And it helps ensure that the lessons we learn from EMIF are comparable across the industry. So some of the IRIS Plus indicators that we use include looking at the number of full-time jobs held by women at investment and after investment in the SME, number of management positions held, number of SMEs that serve women as their primary customer, number of SME fund management positions. So we're looking at, again, at both the layers, and number of SME fund senior management that are women, the composition of the investment committee, and others. But I'm going to stop there. As I've said, it's a huge topic, and I could probably talk for a long time, but I don't want to overwhelm you, and I want to give others a chance to speak. So thanks again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Purdy. I think it was a very exciting presentation, a lot of food for thought. I have noted myself that it's not a moral obligation, it's actually a business requirement, and that's actually what we are trying to do, driving more efficiency. And probably this three-tier approach at the fund level, at the investment level, and eventually at the SME level is very inspiring. Please hold your questions in the audience, because we will save time for Q&A. So keep your question for a later stage. Now I would like to invite Jennifer to introduce the approach of SWIFT. And Jennifer has been in this space for a long time already, actually a pioneer in gender-led investing. So Jennifer, the floor is yours, and we should save 10 minutes for Q&A at the end.
So Grace had your same issue coming off mute. Thanks more than Grace and for giving me the opportunity to talk to you today about our gender lens investing work. I came into impact investment after spending 20 years working in the private equity industry across Europe and Asia. And the reason for coming into the field was really to look at how more capital could be getting mobilized into robust product that would deliver the returns that institutions needed, both from a commercial perspective, but also overlaying needs from a social outcomes perspective. And so the work that I'm talking to you today from a gender lens perspective is coming from that background, where working in the private equity industry, much of the work I was doing and thinking about these matters over that 20 years was much more around diversity and inclusion in the private equity industry. It was only really moving into impact 3 years ago when I joined the global impact firm, I really started thinking about diversity and inclusion and gender equality as far as how you integrate it within an investment strategy and the investments that you're doing. Next slide, Grace. So from the perspective of an approach, and picking up on what Purdy said, over the last 3 years, we've been investing 2 programs. The first one was the SWOF program, which was funded by the Australian government through Investing in Women. And that program was focused on women's entrepreneurship. And that was a demonstration program to show institutions we could deliver commercial returns with that focus. That had been an historic bottleneck when investors were thinking about gender lens investing, and really looking at how we could take that demonstration work and bring a larger product to market, larger from a fund size perspective, at more like 100 million, 150 million. And why the need for that larger product was linked to the fact that many institutions need funds to be at a certain size before they can start allocating into them because of the size of checks they need to write and also the diversification requirements. Now, as we were thinking about that product and our gender lens investment strategy within that product, picking up on what Purdy was saying from the EMIT perspective, when you think about gender lens investing and you're looking at it from the perspective of where does that create an investment opportunity and where does that create some form of risk mitigation, it leads you to be able to looking at the field in 5 different ways. One is we talked about what I was doing in the past, which was more about how do we get greater diversity into the fund managers and the industries that are taking the decisions around investment allocation. But then when it comes to the underlying investment strategies, you can look at it from the perspective, and we are doing in the new fund, of women's entrepreneurship, also looking at the sectors where women are prevalent in the workforce and how do we develop the situation for women in those sectors in their career paths. So there you can be looking at workplace environment issues, pay equity, just participation, professional development, continuing education. The third one is looking at unmet wants and needs of women and where we can develop products and services to meet those needs. There we will also think about that in the context of the balancing of work and household responsibilities, because for many women around the world, that constant balancing is what prevents them from taking an active role within their economy. So that's leading to a lot of work around care economy within the field. And finally, what we felt was really important was to work with those entrepreneurs that really understood the way diversity and inclusion and gender equality was going to lead to better business performance and investment performance. And within that particular a pillar, we call it a pillar, and it now fits across all of our work. We developed a particular tool called the Gender Equality Scorecard, and you can almost think about that scorecard like a credit rating. What it allows you to do is score a company for gender, track that rating over time, and then work on gender interventions that allow you to improve the rating with an understanding that the investment thesis is the more that you do that, the more robust and from a business performance perspective, the company will be. Next slide, please. Great, perfect. So you'll see the scorecard on the screen there, and it looks at different dimensions, but cognizant of time here. When we're really working with entrepreneurs around the scorecard, and even when we're talking to our investors about this idea of where gender equality leads to better business and investment performance, we're really trying to help those entrepreneurs and investors understand where that is playing a role. So it's things like the ability for those companies to attract and retain better talent, to develop that talent so they have a more productive workforce. It also leads to benefits from a PR and corporate identity perspective, to be seen to be a company that is working in this area, and leading to lower turnover, just generally better morale. And what you see on the bottom of the slides here is very much within our work. We're touching on many different sectors. So it's not that with GLI you're sitting within one sector or industries. It can touch on really any sector around the world. And so within our work, we're working with education companies, with healthcare businesses, with food-related businesses, and much of our work is within those areas. And when you look at a situation like what we went through last year with COVID, and that's sort of what's coming through in these summaries, the fact that what we saw is the fact that we were working with those entrepreneurs a lot, since we invested in them around things like flexible work arrangements, meant that when COVID hit and their countries were being locked down, those companies were better able to adapt to that situation and be working with a remote workforce than other companies in those markets. Next slide, please. So then with the gender equality scorecard work, this tool has been developed really over the last 3 years, both through our own team, but also working with many partners in this field builders like Catalyst at Large and Criterion Institute, but also DFAT and Investing in Women and other governments, as well as the DFIs that have been really looking and thinking about the impact measurement and monitoring frameworks that you can use within GLI investing. And from that perspective, what I think we've all been mobilizing around, there's been a plethora of tools that have been developed, but what we've been mobilizing around is how do we ensure that there's harmonization of those tools, and that investors realize, and fund managers and everyone working within the ecosystem, that you don't necessarily need to make choices between frameworks. You should use the frameworks and standards and tools that are most relevant for what you're seeking to do from an impact outcomes perspective. And it was really with that thinking in mind as we were working with the GIN and like the DFIs that are working on the 2X challenge and that criteria, we were ensuring we were harmonizing what we were doing and the different vectors that we call them in from a GES perspective, vectors, and we have 4 underlying parameters under each vector, but that was being, we were sort of matching what we were doing there with the GIN Iris Plus framework, so that if people were making those choices around which impact measurement framework I should use, they understood that just, you know, if you made the decision you wanted to use the gender equality scorecard as your framework, you were still going to be leveraging the GIN Iris Plus framework. And that's what I'm really trying to bring out on the bottom of this slide, is we have the parameters that we're using from a gender equality scorecard perspective, and they are matching different categories under the GIN Iris Plus framework within their gender framework and Iris Plus. So, thanks, Maud.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I don't see any question in the chat, so I would like to give you 1 or 2 minutes really to ask me a question. In the meantime, I will actually start with a question for you, Jennifer. The scorecard, right, helps to actually really identify the gaps, right, in your investees. And actually, the premises, and it was demonstrated in the previous slide, is that the more a company improves on this scorecard, the better the performance will be, right, in terms of efficiency, in terms of risk management. Is it something you actually try to measure after a while, right, after following your investees with this scorecard? And can you maybe explain us how you do it and what are the results so far?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, so when in our investment process, the way the scorecard gets used is when we're outsourcing, a lot of that work as we're thinking about those entrepreneurs and when we're meeting with them, we're trying to understand in those discussions, obviously their business and the investment potential, but also their commitment to gender equality and diversity, because we want to ensure that any entrepreneur we work with has a similar alignment there. And so we do use the gender equality scorecard from that perspective to help them understand when we're talking about this area of gender equality, they understand what we mean by that and the role it can play within their business. And as I said, in the underwriting and due diligence, we do score the companies. And then as we're thinking about our 100-day business plan and long-term medium-term value creation plan that we'll be working with the entrepreneur, which will touch on all the things you'd be expecting around financial and risk controls and marketing and, you know, operational improvements. We also have a gender improvement plan integrated into that, where we're going to be working with them on particular projects. And generally those projects are determined by, from the scoring perspective, where those companies are scoring weakest within the gender equality scorecard framework. And then over time, we're scoring those companies. We pull the data on a quarterly basis, and generally, really on an annual basis, we go back and look at the trending and what we're seeing. And we are looking at the interplay between the gender equality scorecard improvement and what's happening from a business perspective, and trying to understand the correlations there. Now, from a broader ecosystem perspective, what we're seeing is that there is a real need for more evidence-based research in this area, so that when you're looking across portfolios, when you're looking across a group of private equity managers operating from a regional perspective, a sectorial perspective, for the institutions that are making decisions around allocating into gender lens investing, what would be very helpful for them is to understand this correlation between gender equality and diversity and inclusion and business performance and investment performance. And there's been lots of research done from a public company's perspective, but the difficulty with that research is because the data set is so weighted towards women in leadership, and to some extent it can capture pay equity depending on the jurisdiction, but it's not allowing, you know, academics and other researchers within the field to look at, you know, gender and the role it plays in business performance in a more holistic way. So that's also something that we're trying to drive within the SWE fund and with all the field builders and the ecosystem at the moment, is how quickly can we get to the point where we can be building those data sets to allow the academics to run that research that those institutions and investors into GLI really need when they're trying to make their portfolio allocation decisions.
No, wonderful, and that's also how it can become mainstream. Now I see many questions popping up, so I will take one and maybe ask Purdy on this. It's a question on the process of due diligence, on the impact strategy, on the theory of change, and I'm assuming it's this question is directed at the fund level. So maybe could you walk us through the process undertaken when selecting a fund, and maybe that's a good question for Purdy.
Yeah, sure, thanks. Conscious of time, so but just in brief, I guess at each step of the process. So you start at initial screening, and what we want to see is that the candidate fund comes forward and already has thought about gender in some way. And I see a related question about, like, when we look a bit deeper, this tends to be lip service and how you deal with that. And I think that's a really great question. So I'll touch on that as well. But once they've hit that, they really are kind of in the field. Okay, so then they're not excluded. If they were completely gender blind or unwilling to kind of take this on board, we would let them be. But if they've met that fairly low bar of, like, they're interested in this and they have something there, or they don't have much but they're willing to learn, then we continue forward. And the next phase is to dig in a little deeper. And so the questions that I mentioned earlier that are in our kind of tool scoring card, about, you know, how many, what does the management composition look like in the SME fund? What systems do they have to measure GLI and social impact? At each phase of the kind of investment process, before as we get towards actually doing a formal due diligence assessment, we dig a little bit deeper into that, until finally, as part of the due diligence, when things are getting serious and we think, you know, this fund looks like something that we're interested in, because it fits not just the gender criteria, but all of the other kind of criteria that we need, and it's looking like a good contender. And then we start to ask the more detailed questions about what initiatives are in place. We do, you know, as is normal in due diligence, one-on-one interviews with the key management team to kind of get a real sense of what their commitment is to impact and to gender, and to get a sense of where the gaps are. So it's okay if it's at this point a kind of lip service, as long as there is a genuine interest to improve. And then we work with the fund to identify what those gaps are and where we would best tailor our technical assistance to help shift them along the spectrum of sophistication as a gender lens investor, and to mainstream gender within their organization. And that will depend on a lot of things, including their absorptive capacity. You know, we recognize that fund managers are going to be really busy, and EMIF in particular targets first and second time fund managers. So they've got a lot going on and a lot to learn. So we can't overwhelm them, and the technical assistance will tend to be delivered not just for like in 1 week, but over a number of years in the kind of early phases of our relationship with that fund. Yeah, so it really is a bespoke process. We have a dedicated partner in our consortium to manage the SME fund technical assistance. And hopefully by the end of it, we've seen a real shift in the way that they approach, and a real improvement in the way that they approach gender management and gender impact. I guess the other thing, and this touches on another question and then I'll be quiet, is how do we deal with kind of integrating IRIS into our system and into our M&E framework? One of the biggest tensions is the desire to get a lot of data and managing that and reconciling that with a desire not to overburden either the SME fund or the SMEs. And so that is one of the things that we thought really carefully about in developing our M&E framework, and that we will continue to tweak as we go along, because we probably haven't got it exactly right. And we want to be able to iterate that and to continuously improve.
Excellent. Actually, we are already at the end of our session, but I'd like to ask Jennifer if she can also comment on this last part, which is challenges around integrating IRIS Plus in the IMM framework.
And I would say that we've never really found challenges with that integration. Even before IRIS Plus, using the IRIS metrics, what we found is that they were extremely helpful, and as we were working with the entrepreneurs, understanding from their business model perspective, what were the income outcomes that they were trying to drive, they normally fitted very well with the IRIS and then IRIS Plus framework. So from that perspective, and then when it came to, I guess, something that was much deeper, gender equality scorecard and IRIS Plus integration, I think we have 24 parameters, and 18 of those completely matched IRIS Plus. There are some areas where we're thinking about things maybe in a slightly different way, particularly when it comes to value chains. And, you know, I think the idea is we will try and find a way, again, of harmonizing those so that there is a set of categories that are being used by as much of the ecosystem as possible within this area, because the more that we are using the same metrics, even if we are consolidating them in different ways together, because it just makes it easier for people to benchmark against each other.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. I can see a lot of very exciting questions coming in, but I'm really sorry because I am the timekeeper and I realize we're already at the end of the session. I just would like to let you know that we are going to organize a couple of events at the GIN in the region for members, but also for non-members. So I'll just flag the one for non-members. We are doing one with USAID Green Invest on regenerative agriculture in May, and one with the CFA Hong Kong, Impact Investment Decision Making Insight on Financial Performance. So you are welcome to join, and you're obviously welcome to join the GIN as well as members. Grace, I'd like to hand over to you maybe for a final word of a wrap up and final word.
Yes, thank you. I feel like we as these tend to go, the conversation really just started rolling and we are out of time, but really appreciate everyone joining and sticking with us for this hour to learn a bit more about gender lens investing, how IRIS Plus can help, and how investors integrate gender lens into their strategies. And to that end, would really, really love to thank again Purdy and Jennifer for joining and sharing your gender lens investing approach and experiences. This has been a very, very helpful session, and I hope folks enjoyed it. And here are a few ways you can connect with the GIN and stay in touch with us, and we will end there because I know we're a couple of minutes over, but thank you again, everyone, for joining.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.